Welcome back to Weekly Daily Wednesdays. I'm Vince Stone, joined every week by Pedro Mateus and
Hello,
Portugal. And joining us this week, you might have heard of him, Brian Gordon.
Hello.
That's him. We're going to be talking about the Linuxy news and some of the gaming news. P-Man, how about we just get right into those nasty minutes?
Yep, sounds good. So Microsoft had their little, what do they call it, build 2016. And one of the biggest things to come out of it was that they're bringing the Bash shell to Windows 10. You had a bit in the notes that they're trying to bring everyone's favorite text editor to Windows.
I know. Originally, I was like, isn't there a way to run Emacs in the Windows? And I was like, oh, let's Google this. I went to the videos. I was like, here's a 7-minute simple installation. Just, you poor things. You kind of pointed out, I mean, isn't this going to kind of duplicate some of the functionality of Cygwin?
Yeah, that was the one thing I was really looking for, because they talk about having a Linux subsystem inside Windows. And I'm like, yeah, that's what Cygwin already does. Why?
Man, I don't know, but you got to think just the ability to run HTOP alone will like have the suicide rates of Linux users forced to run Windows at their day jobs. You have any thoughts on this, Gordon?
I don't know. I've had mixed success with Cygwin. So if they're building it into Windows and Microsoft's going to maintain it, then at least, they're doing penance, I guess. I don't know, because that seems like torture to me. But I don't know. Good for them. I mean, you've hit rock bottom when your big announcement is Bash Shell. So
yeah, and it was canonical when bringing that in, and I was like, well, why don't you just resurrect Caldera Open Linux, man? I mean,
maybe canonical can bring Mirror to Windows.
I didn't even.
He is, of course, speaking of the ultimate. Upcoming excerpt. Well, I guess you'd call it.
It would be a fine act of trolling. That's all I'm saying. I think that would be a good idea for them to try that.
Yeah, that's a kind of a running joke we have on the show about that do nothing Wayland. No one's ever going to use that. Mirror is clearly the future.
Yeah, Mirror's the future.
I joke, but I mean, if it's the distribution everyone's using it, it's on by default. Guess what you're going to be using by default? So, I like Wayland. But I also need everyone to be using Wayland before it's useful to me. So
right. NVIDIA, didn't they add, what was it, EGL support?
Yeah.
With the last... so we'll get some drivers for it. But since we're talking about the... there's something, Sriracha...
yeah, there's Satya Nadella apparently had a very quotable sentence in the Build 2016, which was, we want to make things so that others can make things and make things happen. Now, I could comment on the lack of having a thesaurus at hand, but I'd rather just say it's very hard to do whatever it is you want when you have to wait 10 minutes while your PC is rebooting to install Windows updates.
Which is an absolute true story, because every time I cut on that x86 tablet that I own, which is Windows, I managed to shoehorn Windows 10 on there. Every time it's like, oh, Windows needs to apply an update, and like 9-10 minutes later, and I was like, okay, it'll finally shut off. But let's talk about tablets, because it is the age of Aquarius. The M10 FHD Ubuntu Edition pre-orders are live, man. It's absolutely a thing. What is this? It's basically your 10-inch. It's going to be powered by the MT8163, so it's basically going to be a quad-core. It's going to max out about 1.5 gigahertz. Max res on this sucker's, I think, 1200p. One thing about this chip I was kind of not concerned about, I was like, that thing has an FM receiver in it. Why is this not a thing in the States, man? Not that I could pick up anything in this Faraday cage of a house, but come on.
It's a Chinese built tablet. Most of them have FM receivers built into them, even those cheapo iPhone knockoffs that they sell, the Airphones. Yeah, those have FM receivers too. But what I really wanted to see out of this is an x86 version. Can we get an x86 version of this tablet running Ubuntu Mobile? That would be awesome.
Well, here's something I'd like to ask the panel. Even at 1.5 gigahertz, this thing's basically going to be running on the metal, not on top of Java, right? So,
yeah.
Do you think we'll see improve the speed? I mean, I want to play with it, man, but What is this thing? $289, so that's roughly 327 wet American stink dollars. And I'm not a big fan of pre-ordering, but
yeah,
maybe? I don't know, Ryan.
Shouldn't it be at least as fast as a Raspberry Pi?
No, man, you're crazy. Those things are like $500. What do you want about?
Right, it's got a touch screen, okay, but that's where your cost comes from. But like the new Raspberry Pi they just announced runs faster than that, doesn't it?
Yeah, but yes. This does have 2 gigs of RAM though, so haha.
Because that's super expensive now. That's at least $150 right there. So
just ask Apple, man. Yeah.
Yeah. $50 for a 4 gigabyte DIMM. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about Wayland.
Yeah,
so.
we were talking about Wayland, and the guys. Some people in the Linux community decided to get together and basically create a drop-in replacement for the i3 window manager. If you're one of those people that likes those tiling window managers and you were kind of scared of the days that Wayland and Mir became the defaults, well, this one supports Wayland out of the box, and that's great. It's if you didn't really like the idea of running GNOME 3 or Plasma 5 to get your Wayland on, now you have Sway. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's pretty neat. Something to see. I want to play around with Wayland. I really don't want to play around with Mir, but yeah, having something to run it on is going to be kind of neat. But I mean.
I would just like to say as a game developer that everyone that writes a tiled window manager, I hate you forever. Stop doing that. Makes it so hard to write games for. That's all I want to say. You can all reply if you want.
No. That's a fair opinion. I never really got into tiling window managers because I could get on with them, but you apparently don't really like them. Why is that?
I mean, I don't use whatever makes you happy, but please don't file a bug report. That's all I'm asking. It's just like there are so many games, so many. Like if you look at I don't know, the Valve keeps a bug tracker on GitHub for all of their games and for Steam itself, and it's just this overwhelming flood of bug reports where this doesn't work on my window manager named Awesome, which is a weird name because all the damn bugs come from something called Awesome. But or rat poison is my favorite. Like you've hit a low in your life when you're running a window manager named rat poison. Like just if you need a hug, I'll give you a hug. It's okay. Just don't run anything called rat poison. Just don't do it. Don't do it. But jokes aside, I mean, tiling window managers have their own problems with games, but usually we can work around. The problem is that everyone writes a new window manager every other week, and they all have bugs, and they don't follow the spec perfectly, and the spec is really kind of hard to follow perfectly because it's really vague in certain points. But I feel like we're kind of at the point where if it doesn't work with, I don't know, GNOME or Unity, or KWin, one of the major 3, please fix your window manager. Don't assume it's our bug. I mean, just there's millions of these window managers, and new ones pop up all the time, and I just wish less of them would happen.
Yeah,
I don't know. That makes sense. It's like when we used to have every week someone had a new Linux kernel scheduler, and they all just broke in fabulous and interesting ways, but it worked for their one use case. But I still got a bug report for it. It's my problem that you wrote a scheduler that doesn't schedule. I don't know. Don't do that.
Good times. Okay, well, let's talk about the future, because this is why and when VR will fail. Very, very long, drawn out. This guy hates VR as much as I do, I think. As someone who grew up in the 90s, outlines a couple of things. I mean, one thing they kind of get right is the adoption rate, and that's going to be a big issue. And I think that's kind of going to hinge, because everyone that was at GDC and played around, they kind of said Oculus, PlayStation VR, then the Vive.
HTC Vive.
Is kind of how it's set up. And for PC adoption rate, you're definitely what are you going to be dropping unless you've already got, a semi-yellow swag system, a couple extra Doritos on a 970 just to walk in the gate on that. But then again, what was it, from Unity? They were talking about adaptive quality. We covered that last week, foveated rendering. They're going to open source and release that plugin for older GPUs like a 680 to deliver a VR experience. maybe that's going to help out. I still think it's going to boil down to people don't like wearing shite on their heads for extended periods of times, and it looks like you're getting face-staffed by a toaster. I mean, those two things.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the notes that the guy who wrote the article said that the user base won't be big enough to entice major developers. And you said that it depends on the PS4 adoption. Now, if the Kinect has taught us anything, is that console peripherals aren't exactly selling points, as it were, especially one that's very cumbersome to use, like precisely wearing stuff on your head all the time, and something that's pretty heavy and probably is going to be generating a lot of heat because it has a built-in PC basically to handle the rendering and the showing of the stuff that's happening. So yeah, no.
I don't know. Game adoption is going to be one thing. Then you're going to. I'm just waiting because I've said this before. As soon as you mix alcohol and partying into this, the YouTube videos and Vines are just going to be spectacular. I am going to be happy for at least a year. I'm personally more excited about AR, augmented reality, than VR. What about you, Icculus?
Well,
shrug emoticon. Right.
The problem is this. I think that the Oculus Rift and the Vive or however that's pronounced, and the PlayStation 1, all these things are coming out, and they're all coming out at the same time, which means at least one, if not two of them, were rushed to market to match the other ones. But that, which is a problem in and of itself. But let's just narrowing it down just to the Oculus Rift. Even if it's the best thing we can do right now, I'm sure it will have its problems, and I'm sure it's going to be uncomfortable, and you're always going to look like a dork with this thing mounted on your face. But those are probably solvable problems over time. But the problem socially that we're seeing with this is that everyone is looking at the shipping of the initial retail version of the Oculus Rift as a message that VR is a solved problem. But we don't know anything yet. We're learning so much right now. And I think maybe we'll get there, but there's a risk with this, as there's with a lot of technologies like this, that it'll ship and it won't be perfect. And a lot of people will get motion sick, as you'd expect to in VR. And then we'll dismiss it the same way we dismiss the Kinect and the PlayStation Move and stuff like that, where it's like, it could have worked, maybe it will work eventually, and almost certainly it'll work eventually, but it's entirely possible that we will totally all lose our taste for it and not be interested in throwing money at it, or throwing code at it, or whatever. And Facebook will be like, well, that didn't turn out to be profitable, and they'll shut it down, and then we'll never talk about it again, and that's that. But the risk is to assume that you're going to get a perfect or even a good VR experience from the first generation of any of these things. That's silly. It's just
it's not going to happen.
It's just don't count on this being good. And everyone's the dangers. There's so much money behind it that the marketing people are going to tell you this is great, and don't count on it being that. I mean, and let's hope that the next generation is better and better and better. In the same way, you look at the original 3D video cards that we put out, like the S3 Verge, and things that were even before, like the Voodoo card. It's like they were garbage. They were not good hardware, and they didn't do very much, and they only worked with 2 games or whatever like that. But there's potential there, and nobody threw up from watching it. So it's over time. I mean, you look at where we are with GPUs now and what we're doing with VR, and they're saying you need like a top of the line NVIDIA GPU to run this stuff, and that's how far we've come from, like 1998 or whatever, when 3D video cards started shipping, versus where we are now. And it shows that we still have a lot of way to go. And just don't expect this to be the life-changing technology.
I think I get what you're saying, man. I kind of like the cut of your gym, but if it can survive this first generation, you're saying maybe 3 or 4 generations down, when it is really just a headset you snap on.
Well, I mean, and this might be the argument for AR eventually too, is that the final solution to this is going to be you don't snap anything on. But I don't know, is that 30 years away? Is that 100 years away? I really don't know. I'm not in a position to say, but I think that what killed the PlayStation Move and what killed the Xbox Kinect is that people try it once and they're like, it didn't notice me waving my hand, I fucking quit, And,
right.
And Microsoft said, well, that was a lot of money, let's not do that again to fail. And it's I mean, it could work, it could not. I don't think just this first generation is not going to be representative where anyone wants it to be. I mean, we wanted to get to the point, I assume, that like like it is a Snow Crash, or whatever like that. Although it's worth noting in Snow Crash, he's still snapping something onto his face to be in the virtual reality in the metaverse.
Yeah, Chat Realm's going on about the Matrix. That would be the ideal form factor. You just lay down somewhere, you plug yourself in, and away we go.
It's the part where the machines are using us as human batteries.
I was about to say, ideal, is that a code word for like end of human civilization? Because
yeah, that's basically what VR is dictating at this point. But we should probably move on. And the New York senator proposes tax credit for open source developers.
One for you.
Now,
19.
I just want to say that if it does bring on that Matrix sort of end of the world thing, I always thought Facebook would bring us to that eventually. That's
like button.
They do own Oculus, but yeah. So, Ryan, since you do absolutely no work with open source whatsoever, what do you think of the New York State senator basically wanting to give open source developers that donate their code about $200?
They could have at least given them about like $350. I mean,
I
or
would
$350.
Give me $200. That sounds great. I love that. That's like a quarter of an Oculus Rift. So, I don't know the specifics. I saw someone tweet about it. But that's about the 140 characters. About the extent of what I know about what's going on there. But I don't know that you need. Is that a tax cut or something? I don't know if you need someone to.
Yeah, what this is, I mean, this is Senate Bill S-161, and it's basically going to allow you to claim 20% out-of-pocket cost up to $200 per person. And I'm looking at this, and my first thought is, that's good.
That's not very much.
It's borderline insulting when you think about it.
A really good developer, that might be an hour of their work, 2 hours of their work. That's not
exactly.
You're not going to get a tax cut from that.
Well, what I'm saying is, it is like, hey, free money. Maybe that'll help out towards my risk, but it's not going to incentivize people to, it's like, hey, yeah, $200. That sounds great.
Well, yeah, I don't think we necessarily need to get into the business where the government is funding open source by giving you tax cuts, but incentivizing it with money is not the worst idea in the world. I mean, you look at the really major contributions to any open source project that we care about, whether it's the Linux kernel or Apache or anything like that. And there is volunteer stuff, but once these projects hit critical mass, almost certainly it's full-time developers being paid to work on that. So it's not the idea that money doesn't motivate open source developers is just a ridiculous idea. Of course, everyone needs to eat, whether they're going to get rich off their personal project or not. But if they do want to incentivize that, I don't know that like through $200 is the problem is the right solution. But I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what government should be doing. It should be working as a force for good in the community by taking its budget and helping use that to encourage people to contribute back to society. I don't know.
The one point I brought up in the notes was, why wasn't this already a thing? Why weren't tax breaks or some other form of, compensation for open source developers to actually, feel like they're not just working for the sake of working?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but have you met America? We don't believe in if it doesn't make money, we don't actually talk about it at all. But I've used this explanation about politicians in America before. But did you ever see the show Mr. Robot? There's one scene in there where he's like, well, this guy's the CTO of the company, but how technical can he be if he has a BlackBerry on his belt? And that's every politician in America. It's like, if you're asking them to understand what open source is at all, let alone how, improving contributions back to, an open source pool of, software is valuable. I mean, they're probably somewhere between they don't get it and they have lobbyists whispering in their ear that this is one step away from communism. I mean, you're asking why it hasn't happened before. It seems pretty clear to me, at least in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's something. So a step in the right direction.
It sounds like progress. I'll take it. If you're going to pay me to do open source stuff or at least give me a tax break, okay, I'll take that.
Not a bad thing, but let's talk about the Reddit. Wait, nope, hang on. This is the Raspberry Pi.
The Raspberry Pi with the Amazon bits.
So this is definitely a thing. You can now, if you really hate yourself, in 250 simple steps, make your own Alexa. Is it Alexa?
Yeah, it's Alexa.
It's like I tried to tell Google, man, instead of saying, okay, Google, if you could switch it where I could just say operator, I would use that thing in public all the time. This is
Tank, exit,
Right, exactly. But yeah, this is hella extensive. And my first thought, I mean, it's completely open source. It's a great thing. But my big takeaway from this project is, at least for now, Amazon is kind of chill about letting other people play with their service. My second thought is, why is this not in my Sonos speakers? Because that would be awesome, because Alexa, that trash can tent sounds horrible. That's the reason I don't own one, because it's like, rah, 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 rah. Its audio quality is definitely not there. And, you know, if you do anything, like sometimes I help out with Free IT Athens here, and I'll, you know, do a class on video production or, you know, how to install Linux. I was like, this would be fantastic for punishing students I didn't like.
Considering how hard it is to get a Sonos working with Linux, if you want anywhere close to all of the functionality that it has, you need to use Wine. Can only imagine the kind of hoops you'd have to jump through to get it running on ARM.
But hey, man, the Pi's a neat and that's just cool. I mean, if I was, what would you say? 'Cause if we were 14 again, I would be doing that on the weekend. I'd be making that.
Nothing but free time, right?
Right.
Yeah. I don't. So basically, this is an open source project that lets you set it up so that Amazon can listen to the things that you say in the privacy of your own home.
Yes.
No. This one's better.
Sign me up for that. That sounds awesome.
No, this one's push to talk. It doesn't.
Oh well. Yeah,
right. So this one actually has that privacy feature built into it, man. So
I could, you can write a simple bash script that just keeps saying buy stuff all the time. That seems like a better idea.
I don't know. I've already sold my soul to Amazon, so it's like, here's some more information. But yeah,
now we can get onto the Reddits.
All right, let's talk about our favorite haven for 14-year-olds. Speaking of that, Reddit is GTK. This is our first attempt out of the box by Samdroid, and yeah, I mean it looks like CDE kind of back in the day, maybe. It has some features. It has some interesting things to install, with the rubies and all that. Because I'm just my give a damn meter kind of clicked on everywhere. Like when I was installing pip3 to get what I think verbatim obscure thing. It was marked down URLized, and I realized I just didn't care enough to continue because, perfectly honest, I do most of my Redditing on the tablets, and outside of that, I mean, if you're going to be doing it on the browsers and you want this functionality, just use the Reddit enhancement suite. That'll give you that plus more. But hey, man, open source, good project. I want to check back on this in 6 months and see if it, it'd be nice to have our own little native client, right?
Someone needs to make either a copper repo or a PPA for me to even bother.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel bad, like I'm getting old but my first instinct, I was like, it's get clone. Let's build this. But yeah, I mean, now that we're going, getting closer to the home, it's like, yeah, is that in a PPA somewhere? It'd be really nice.
Yep. So. Laziness everywhere.
Do you use the Reddits, man? Would that be?
Do I use Reddit?
Yeah, once or twice.
No, I don't. No. I have an account on there. I've used it before, but I don't. It's not. It's funny to be like, oh, I don't have enough time to clone this thing from Git. It's like, yeah, I'm on Reddit. Value time more. I mean, don't do that.
There's passively than actively. I mean, using it as a news source versus getting in the comments, which.
Oh, hang on. Let me check Twitter though. I'm guilty.
All right. Hey, let's do a shameless plug. Because everyone has helped make this happen. That's our Patreons kicking us 138 What Stinky Caches every Saturday night, and it helps make this show happen. And that's how we got to that goal. We currently have 74 Patreons. Our next goal is coming up where Jordan, who hates Serious Sam 3, so we're going to force him to beat it all the way in co-op. And, whatever you can give, $1 million, 5 cents. We're all happy with that. It's all about the numbers, adds up, lets us do more cool stuff, more cool shows, and generally have a good time. Just want to thank everyone, and I think this week another Matthew, not Frenchie, but a Matthew.
A different Matthew.
Yeah, he kicked us a few shekels, and that's great. So just want to thank everybody for that. Okay, now tunes. We talked about this last week, P-Man. Yep. It is
yes, we did.
Open source. It was the animation package from What studio was it?
Futurama and basically all of the Miyazaki films, like your Princess Mononoke's and Chihiro's Voyage Trip. Can't remember the name.
So it just came out with the open source, and genuinely just a few days later, like, you know what, we got it working on build 51. Although it doesn't
quote unquote working.
Yeah, I mean, it might crash if you try to draw something, but technically, it's up. But man, they've just made such huge progress on this, and I'm very happy to see it because, I mean, having a full animation studio in Linux, after we get done with the first wave of Brony cartoons, okay, that's going to be great. But, just more multimedia, mix that in with Blender, and it's just, we're living in this moon future where stuff like this is available to us, and it's priced to sell at free. So I'm thinking probably by the end of next month, we'll have something that was working. Gordon, did you hear about the tunes going open source?
I did hear about it. I have no opinion about it.
Coming up next.
That sounds cool. I don't know.
If we could only...
this you probably have an opinion
it runs, but it crashes if you draw anything. But it probably took a lot of work to get to that point. So,
right.
They'll get there. That sounds cool.
So let's get into something you may have an opinion on. Namely, you had some interesting bits to say on Twitter. Namely that the spinning cube in OpenGL takes about 78 lines of code with a lot of SDL thrown in there. And Vulkan takes about 2,800.
5 more lines at most.
Basically, yeah.
And the tweet, I couldn't see what tweet that was exactly, but the tweet before that says this is a deeply unfair comparison. So, but
yes.
Because SDL took care of all the GL context creation, and there's no texturing, and also the fixed function pipeline. But the point I wanted to make there is that there's nothing wrong with Vulkan. I mean, it's very, very low level. And if you just want to jump in and draw some stuff, it's probably not the API you want to use. You probably want to aim for OpenGL or whatever, if Direct 3D, if you like that better and you're a Windows user. But yeah, it's, I saw somebody else had tweeted something to the extent of my Vulkan code is at 3,000 lines of C now, and I can now officially clear the screen to any color I want. I can't actually draw anything, but Vulkan is very low level. It's also very verbose, but it also lets you do whatever the hell you want from any thread. You have complete control over everything, and you are basically now going to be on a level playing field in ways that we haven't been with Windows and Mac OS and stuff. Because all these next generation APIs all basically say, here's the video card. You fill a command buffer with stuff that you want to push to that card, and that's it. That's basically the whole API. And when it's kind of hand wavy to be like, that's the whole API. That's all you have to do. Anything is possible. But there are lots and lots of times with Direct 3D where it's like, okay, given the right extensions and modern hardware and drivers that have caught up, we can do the things that Direct 3D does. But usually it wasn't a one-to-one mapping. Sometimes you had to go all the way around the mountain to get to what you needed to do. And it might be really slow, but it at least got the right pixels on the screen or whatever like that. But a lot of that, even if the function names and the structures look slightly different, more or less you can do exactly the same thing in DirectX 12 versus Vulkan versus Metal versus Mantle. More or less they're all Mantle when it comes down to it with some syntactic.
Yeah, the moment that AMD open sourced Mantle, it was bound to happen. And I suppose that gets us into the questiony bits, because I have some actual questions.
Okay, this is something we're going to be trying to do a lot more of on this show, and then we're going to bring some people in that actually know what they're talking about, and we're going to try to pick their brain organs. This week, you might have known he was on the show, so we might as well do it to him. This poor, unfortunate guy. You never heard of him, new to the scene, new to Linux gaming. That's Ryan. He's beautiful. Look at him with his pans. I mean, it's majestic. So, Pedro, let's just go ahead and start brutalizing. We can skip that first one because we kind of covered it during the show.
We already covered that one. So you actually mentioned before we started recording that you are reporting the original Serious Sam games to Linux. How's that going? Can we see them on
Everything
Steam?
old is new again. That's right. Yeah, no, there's nothing quite like blowing the dust off of code you haven't touched for 15 years and trying to get it running again. So what happened is Crow Team, the guys who wrote Serious Sam, released the source code to the original games, which is awesome. I love when that happens because now this game is going to show up in all kinds of places that it never ran before. And fix bugs that I never fixed in the Linux version will get fixed and stuff like that. But they released this. I wrote to Crow Team, was like, "You guys are awesome. Can I put out my version?" And they're like, "Yeah, but you have to make sure that you don't release anything we didn't release, like because there's some Xbox code in there they can't give out, and the GameSpy code, which obviously isn't used anymore because GameSpy
it's dead."
So basically, we ended up doing this massive like hand merge between my code base and the source code that came from Crow Team, and it was like a 60,000 line diff, which it took 2 days just to read through the changes, let alone actually merge any of them. And as of yesterday, I finally got it merged, and they looked through it and said, "Okay, ship it." So it's pushed to GitHub, and now I'm just going through and trying to fix up the places where things broke. And I think we're pretty close on that. And then we're going to have Linux and macOS Serious Sam again, and in a nice open source, GitHub repository, and people can make changes and improvements and fix bugs in inline assembly and stuff like that. So it's been an exhausting week working on this, and just you get really deep into hand merging source code from that long ago, where you can't decide what was your mistake versus their mistake, or what you were even thinking back then, and it's just it really makes you start to question the existence of God at that point. You just can't. The cruelty of the universe that would allow this to happen to you, but once that awful work is done, then it's just another open source project. Anyone can jump in and contribite and improve and all that stuff.
I'm glad you got the groundwork knocked out on that, because I remember when I first read that, I think within like 2 hours I read something about you. Well, like you tweeted, and I was like, on it. So I'm glad you had some enthusiasm to get that back out.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. The thing is, like, the Serious Sam, the Linux version, shipped with some bugs. Like it was careful to link against like the right things and ship with the program. And then like stupidly we linked it with Ogg Vorbis, but it had to be sitting in like user local lib or something stupid like that. It was just a mistake that got made at the last second. And I don't think the last boss was killable or something ridiculous like that.
But
at that point,
a bad thing.
I was so burned out on this. I'm sorry, what?
That was probably a bad thing to have happen.
Well, it's
being able to beat the game.
It will not be the first unbeatable game that has ever shipped,
right.
And people paid money for it. But not to excuse it, but like when that game shipped, I had just come back from Loki, I started working on this as like, this is it. Everything's fucked. Like we're never gonna have any video games on Linux. We're never gonna, it's just always gonna be a server platform and stuff like that. And everything felt very desperate and very depressing. And I felt like I'd spent a year and a half of my life at Loki wasting my time, where I'd spent, I didn't go there to make money. I went there because it's a dream I believed in, and it kind of fell apart in a spectacular fashion. Like Serious Sam for a long time I was just holding on to this as like the only thing that not only proves that there's an industry there, but also that I had any self-worth at all, which is probably not a healthy way to be, but that's how I felt at the time. And, after months and months of really hard work on that, doing just a lot of difficult labor on it, it got to the point where it's like it works enough that we can play it, I'm shipping it, and I can't look at this anymore, and
you were burned out.
So it goes. I'm sorry, what?
You were burned out.
I was burned out. Yes, that's a good way to put it. I was burned out. And it's funny, I have a change log where back in the early days of the universe, when all we had was CVS to do revision control, you could only commit file by file. There was no such thing as like, here's my change set, like Subversion does, or Perforce, or Git, or Mercurial. All your commits now are single units of work, right? Like instead of like, here's changes I made to this file, and here's some other ones over here, which are related, but CVS doesn't know that at all. So we had gotten into the habit at Loki, and after that, of writing out by hand very detailed notes about everything we changed and why we did it, which was really a godsend when I had to come back 15 years later and figure out what the hell is going on here. But you could see the changelog went like, I started hard in some month and went hard every day. And then like 3 months go by and there's no changes. And then like kind of like petered out like halfway through a sentence on one of the changelogs and never went back to it, and I should upload that changelog. People would be very interested in that, I think.
I think that'll make an interesting.
But my point being, like, it was hard, grueling labor, and I don't think most programs get as much changes as Serious Sam needed to get running on Linux, especially in a world where we have Unreal Engine and Unity and stuff, where you can, if the engine is portable, you get up and running much faster on Linux now. But back at the time, it was weird to be revisiting that after all this time. But what it showed me is, hey, I worked really hard on this. And the thing about burnout is, by the end, you've put all this time into it, and since it's not a success, you feel like you just fucked around for a year. You didn't do anything at all. And it was kind of nice to see this massive diff and be like, oh, I did a lot of work on that. And then it kind of felt good to forgive myself for that a little bit after 15 years. So, and now,
awesome.
Now that it's open source and other people can help, and I can spend a little time on it again, a little bit more refreshed, it feels like we're going to right a wrong. And I like that. I like writing wrong.
Okay. That's really cool, good. Man. Yeah, that, like I said, I'm glad that was definitely something you wanted to get back into, and you did in a spectacular way. But you did bring up, which is our next thing, is something I really just wanted to ask you, and just let everyone get your feedback on. Is first, I want to say, well, like the whole Loki thing and that, and I was like terrified when Steam came out for Linux. I was like, don't let this happen again. And fortunately that didn't. But one thing that has happened is we've seen Unreal Engine 4 go open source. I mean, you can basically export to Linux without too much work, because we've seen some developers that really didn't do anything but that. And now we have Unity. They have their token Linux version, and there's other smaller things like Ledvux and Godot that are helping to make porting these games, exporting, not really porting, almost semi-painless, man. Has that like changed things for you? You're like, okay, I don't have to deal with so much nightmare fuel? Or do you have people like, all right, I can't get this to work here, can you put the polish on it and get it out the door?
It's not nightmare fuel. They're all interesting problems. The problem is that you tend to run into the same nightmare fuel, the same interesting problem over and over again, and it stops being interesting. There's only so many times you can be like, oh, look, the file name case is wrong. Let me just go fucking fix that. Okay. But I've been saying this for 2 decades now, is that if you fight for every game you want to be ported, it's a losing battle, because there's more games than there's engineers that can spend time porting them. What you need to do is get the engines, and we're getting to that point too. And it might be SteamOS, it might just be developer attitudes are changing over time. I don't know. It could be a lot of things, but we're at the point where the engines are becoming portable to Linux, which makes all of these things much less of an uphill battle. And if you make a game in Unreal Engine 4, or you make a game in Unity, or you use XNA, you can. A lot of these things. I mean, Ethan Lee's been talking about the sub 60 port. He's always chasing the sub 60 port, which I thought meant 60 minutes. If we can get this game up and running
60
in
seconds, he actually managed to get it down to 78 seconds.
And to my understanding, he hasn't done it yet, but I have no doubt he's going to eventually, and probably not that far from now. So, so getting the engines, whether it's XNA or Unreal or whatever, that's the real win, because that will get you more games faster, and it'll also get to the point where you start to think of games as a definite, like an obvious choice to come to Linux right out of the box, instead of we'll get this 6 months to a year from now, if ever.
You're talking about Rocket League. I'm sorry. Never mind.
We'll get to that. But I suppose our next question is tips for working at home without going completely mental. I can sort of relate to that.
In the interest of full disclosure, I worked on Rocket League. I'm really sorry.
Burn him!
Sorry. Yes, working at home, he said? Something like that?
Basically,
without going
I mean, you've been working for yourself, which I assume. And that's something I've been asked, and something I've like recently have been dealing with is like what to do when there's downtime, and without keeping productive, and you kind of get what I'm saying there.
Well, my strongest recommendation would be don't have children. Once you have them, they just crawl in, man. You can't get. I have other friends that work at home that have kids that tell me things like, "Oh yeah, like they understand when the door's closed during the day. Daddy's working in his office." I've never had that luxury. Also, I don't have a door, having children makes everything basically a game all day, which is cool, but it makes it also very hard to be productive. So lots of times my office is at Starbucks now. Just go somewhere that's quiet and with an internet connection that you can do your work without anyone bothering you. But other than that, like the biggest problem I have had, and I think most people would agree with this that work from home, children aside, because they're a blessing and a curse in and of themselves. But the biggest problem that you'll have working for yourself at home is Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, the Feedly, whatever. Everyone has their particular drug that they go back to when their mind is wandering. It's like, oh, this is compiling and it's going to take 30 seconds, so I'll go check Feedly so I can catch up on all the RSS feeds. And then 20 minutes later, you come back and you're feeling outraged about an article you read about some shit that Donald Trump said. And then you're like, oh, where was I? Oh, this compile failed 10 seconds after I started it because I forgot a semicolon. Yep. But you've wasted 25 minutes in the meantime. Right. That's the absolute curse, is trying to keep that amount of focus. And, people have their different solutions to it. Like, I have a host file, so if I try to go to Facebook, it just literally will not let me load it and stuff like that. I don't use Facebook, but I am a very obsessive Twitter user. But you got to turn off the notifications on the things that give you notifications, because every time someone replies to a tweet with something funny, I want to be like, oh, I'm going to go click like on that, and then you've lost your train of thought. So, and programming is really, really bad about that. Maybe everything is. I don't know. I'm a programmer, but where it's like, well, I got distracted for 10 seconds and I'm going to lose 2 hours of work for it, because, you have this whole mental model you've built in your head, and that kind of crumbles down when someone distracts you. That's why a lot of companies are like, you can't bother people from this time of day to this time of day. You can send an email, but do not go up to their desk and be like, hey, I have a question for you, because you might have just cost that programmer 4 hours of work. I don't know. So, and working from home is the same, but you're your own worst enemy. You start doing things like, oh, I've got, this thing I'm working on here, but I'll just put a little Netflix window up over here and watch Daredevil, just in the background. And, 3 episodes later, like, I wasn't in the background. I was watching that full time.
Oh, man, that can definitely happen. I've had that happen. You say you can keep the squirrel level down to a minimum, right? And for me, I have to have background noise. I can't work in complete silence.
Yeah. I mean, like, you put on a music player, find some music with no lyrics, unless you like lyrics, I don't know, but like something that won't distract you. Like, everyone has their music they play when they have to get shit done, and some people it's like really hard heavy metal. Some people it's like Mozart's Requiem, which, is to remind you you're going to die someday. You better do this faster, but, some people like, whatever it is. I don't think there's anything wrong with music, something that won't distract you. But if you're doing something like Netflix where you have to engage with it, even if it's passively, it's going to cost you your whole workday. You got to just be like, I'm not going to do it. Not going to even look at it. It's not a good idea. So, and everyone learns that the hard way by, losing a day or two of work. But the goal is not to lose a whole year of work doing that. So
now this one is something I personally wanted to ask, but MT, he's the guy who handles all of our back-end stuff, giggity, for the show. Is an elevator pitch something I can come in 1 minute, or at least say to a developer, use SDL2 for input handling and quit when I see the Unity screen, we call it the Unity screen of Nope, popping up in 2016. Yeah. And I was like, well, just throw the controller away. There's no point in trying to use that thing. But you know what I'm saying, man.
Mad bro? I don't know.
Yeah, totally mad bro.
Yeah, I don't know. So what you want to know is what's the elevator pitch for SDL?
Yeah, SDL. I was like, this is why you should use it.
If you write an SDL program, if you write a video game in SDL with no lines of code change, it will probably work on anything you want it to work on. That's my elevator pitch. I don't know. We did this when I did Steam Dev Days. Valve did their developer conference that one time. We had ported Dungeons of Dreadmore to SDL2, and we had it running on an iPad with no lines of code changed. We had it on the Mac. We had an encrypted version of it running with no lines of code changed, et cetera, like that. So, it's just, and we never shipped any of these things because that's how we roll. But yeah, in terms of portability, and it's like, maybe you don't care about the Raspberry Pi. Maybe you shouldn't. I mean, maybe you don't want to ship commercial software for that, and that's okay. Maybe that would even be crazy to do that. But, you're never going to know where your stuff's going to want to run next week. And maybe Linux will be the big thing, or maybe some platform we've never heard of, maybe some console that's going to be the next big hot thing that you never doesn't even exist today. It would be nice if your source code can jump over to that and you could be playing very, very quickly. And SDL has done a lot of work to make sure that all the things that tend to be portability problems are all handled inside of there. So as long as you write to SDL and you don't write to a specific platform, you'd be surprised where it'll just run without having to make any changes.
All right. So while we're on the SDL train, Strider, also one of
here's
the
the
guys
thing, Pedro. He pick one of them.
Yeah, I'll take the first one.
No, we're just going to
you wanted to ask, is it possible to patch SDL1 games via LD preload to make them use SDL2's full screen windowed mode, or at least get those SDL1 games to use dynamic scalings similar to Sanctum 2?
Yes and no.
Uh-huh.
We're working on something. We've been working on something for years, and it keeps getting backburnered for a million other important fires that have to be put out. But we have something we're working on called SDL 1.2 Compat. It's the worst name ever for a language.
There it is.
But that will basically it looks like SDL 1.2, but it's a little tiny library that loads SDL2 and does all its work through there. So for things that we only have binaries for, or things that just simply won't ever get updated, they can still think they're talking to SDL 1.2, but behind the scenes, all the work's being done by SDL2. So you can, maybe get, I don't know, some old Loki game running on Wayland or Mir natively without those things having even existed in 1999.
That would be ideal, yeah. Oh, there it is. Heavy Gear 2.
So something like that, that's it's in progress. But to answer the specific question about the full screen, scaling for software rendered games, like if you had like Doom or Duke Nukem or something that wants to write to every pixel on the screen, those we can definitely scale to without any trouble. We can't really do that with OpenGL games because they expect to control the frame buffer in ways that we can't really stop it from controlling. So maybe with some hacking, anything's possible, but those would probably
them. This is maybe it's just a suggestion, but and probably one that's going to get me flamed. The same way that the universal Windows apps do things, that they get a full screen application to run in a borderless maximized window.
Sure.
Could you maybe, I don't know, push an SDL1 game to run in said borderless window and think that it's running full screen without actually doing so?
Oh, we could maybe. I don't know. We could probably make some awful hacks so that it's talking to a window and then we pull the data from that window and scale it. But the problem with OpenGL is that ultimately OpenGL games want to write to what's called frame buffer 0. And that's the window, and they control that. And we can't override frame buffer 0. It's beyond our control. If OpenGL had been designed the way that Apple did OpenGL ES on the iPhone, where it's not frame buffer 0, you have to actually ask it for a handle to a frame buffer, then we could have faked it and just been like, okay, well, they think they're writing to the screen, but we're going to scale it before it goes there. And we could get fancy with it. Like the Steam overlay hooks in so you think you're talking to OpenGL, but you're not. Like it intercepts all the calls so that you never actually are talking right to the screen. But you're getting into kind of some complicated, nasty things there. So I don't know. It's possibly solvable. Most of them, though, I think we're probably going to want to. I mean, we'd have to figure out what the set of games is. Like, which games are we actually losing there? Is it Heavy Gear 2? I don't know. But
Dungeons of Dreadmore would be one.
Dreadmore? Well, Dreadmore's still on SDL 1.2, but we actually, it's a good example of what I'm saying. We actually did the work to port that to SDL2. Like, we just have to ship that. That would solve that problem. But if it's a lot of open source games, let's just move them to SDL2 and do it right. If it's commercial games, then on a case-by-case basis, we need to see, which we need to fool and which ones we can fix. And I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. There's a lot of answers depending on what the specific problem is per game. Some of them we can definitely get what you want out of without trouble, and some of them it's a question of how much trouble we want.
All right, man. That was pretty good. We're down to 2 questions, and this next to last one comes from Orn, all the way from Bangladesh. And he's having a fun time being a militant atheist in that country, but he is currently in school right now, and he says, if I want to start porting Windows games to Linux, what do I have to learn? Linear algebra, OpenGL, etc.?
Basic math helps, but this is the dirty secret of software development in general, is that everyone thinks that we're sitting here like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. We just have like numbers flying everywhere. But most programming, video games or otherwise, is +1 and -1. You're mostly just iterating through loops of things one at a time. If you want to write video games, you're probably going to want to know some linear algebra, some geometry. Even that, like until you get into the really crazy, high-end, complicated things, you really don't need much more math than you would get from maybe a high school education. Not anything too complicated there. For porting, you probably don't need any of that. The math people figured it out on Windows. So what you'll need for porting stuff is probably no math at all, and a good understanding of how OpenGL works versus Direct3D or Vulkan, if we get to that next, or whatever. And a lot of little things like it's more technique, like what's the right way to go through and get a game bootstrapped so that it crashes on startup and then makes a window and then draws a triangle in the window before it crashes, stuff like that. And there's not very much math involved in that. There's almost no math at all, to be honest with you, if math is the specific concern here. And this gets back to what I was saying about the changelog for Serious Sam. There's 10,000 words about how to do this step by step. So I'll post that somewhere and get you a link to it. Because it turns out to be very methodical. It's very much like, okay, push it through the compiler. What failed in there? Do we comment that out? Do we fix it? Do we leave a note to come back to it later? Until it all compiles. And then once it's building, you run until it crashes. And then just step by step going through it. And a lot of it turns out to be manual labor that isn't what I would describe as skilled labor even, until you get into some of the more complicated parts. And even then, a lot of it's just arcane knowledge. Like, oh, I've already had this problem before. I know how to fix it. Or, like that. So.
Okay.
All right. I guess that brings us to the last question, the most important one.
This is like the sole reason we wanted to get a little echo, give that a second to cancel out. But it's something we want to ask everyone, and it's about what is your favorite method to prepare a grilled cheese sandwich?
To prepare a grilled cheese sandwich?
Yes, sir.
Okay, most people don't know this because this seems like this would be kind of a gross thing to do, but I'm going to give you the secret to a perfect grilled cheese sandwich. Now, most people take a grilled cheese sandwich. They'll take bread and they'll put butter on it, and then they'll put that in the pan and let that cook. And that works. That will get you a grilled cheese sandwich. You need cheese too, surprise. But what you really want to do is you want to take half butter and half mayonnaise. And I think mayonnaise is fucking disgusting. But you take half butter and half mayonnaise and you whip that up together and you spread that across the bread and you cook that on the pan instead of just butter. Now, what this gives you is an incredibly crispy, brown, tasty sandwich when it's finally cooked. Also, it helps because everyone tries to just take the butter out of the fridge and spread it, and that never works. But when you have to whip it with mayonnaise, it gives you a nice smooth consistency, so it will, spread onto the bread.
Sounds delicious.
And you know what else was delicious?
Sounds delicious.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was delicious. Maybe we should do a demo and try that one day. But
a little cooking spin-off show is good. So.
Cooking on Linux.
You see the person in the chat room saying you should melt the butter in the pan. It never works because you never get a good even distribution on the bread if you try and rub the bread around on the pan. Also, I'm really kind of horrified to find out how much I've actually thought about this.
Hey, man, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us and getting this out there. And it's really awesome. You've done a lot to move forward the Linux gaming industry. Hell, at one point, you were the Linux gaming industry.
You were, yeah.
So, mad respect for that, man.
Maybe I will be again someday. Who knows? Anyway, so thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, I've been Vin Stowe.
Wait. We still have to do feedback. I forgot about that.
All right. Yeah. If you want to get in contact with us, right now, the easiest way to do it until we get the web zone set up, leave a message on the YouTubes or on the Patreons page, and we will do our best to get back to each and every one of you. But Frenchie had something to say, man.
Ooh. Yeah, he did. He was looking for developers with some experience in C and SDL2 to help him modernize the OpenGL renderer of PCSX Reloaded, which is a fork of the original PCSX, which is a PlayStation emulator. It's currently the one being used in Lutris, so it makes sense that he would want people to help him with it. Now, the thing thing about PCSX Reloaded is that when I was looking at their Codeplex page, because they're not using GitHub, was that it was submitted in August 27th or 26th, 2013, and it was last updated August 27th, the day afterwards, 2013. So, yeah, but apparently Strider said that there was actually a commit that was sent in September 2015. It's still been over 6 months, Strider. You probably want to find a different emulator to bake into Lutris, maybe?
I don't know. I mean, he's currently maintaining 2 other emulators, so this is just going to be like an extra one.
Yeah.
But if you want to help with that, yeah, just go to Shot Realm Static. He's got a forum post on there. Get back in touch with him and do that nonsense. But Michael Spath, because we were talking about the VRs, right?
Indeed, last week.
And he brought up, he said something I actually forgot about. Razer's OS VR HDK 1.4 is only $299 wet stinky caches and requires only a mid-tier computer. It has the diffusion film tech to reduce the screen dooring effect. Huh?
Yeah, that's pretty good for an HDK, $300. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now, the one thing that worries me is this is probably Razer's. They're probably running something like a Raspberry Pi or some other form of microcomputer to help with the rendering. Maybe, I don't know. They've honestly not pushed anything. It is open source, technically. So we'll have to wait and see more about that, because I honestly don't know. Has Razer ever contributed anything to open source?
I don't know, but these guys have the hacker development kit, man. Come on.
Yeah.
So, head over there. Yeah, give it a look.
Yeah.
But let's put a bow on this. Just nice, quick, and dirty Rob K writes a Unity. Love the friends. Don't let friends use Unity words to live by. Great show, guys. Great show. You couldn't have got us more deeply. But on that note, we're going to close it out. And remember, friends do not let friends use Unity.
Or probably Razer's VR thing, but we don't actually know that. I'm Pedro Mateos.
I'm Ben Stone, and this has been Linux Weekly Daily Wednesday.